When you pray, do you really want the answer? Well, my question to you is, I want you to think back to maybe, it wasn't that long ago, where you prayed for something, but you had in your head how you wanted the answer to come. I want you to fix this, God, but I want it to be in this way. Or I want you to solve this problem, but it has to fit in the way I think it should. So what happens if God does, but it looks differently? Do you want it? Do you acknowledge it? Or do you get mad, like Naaman? Throw his hand up in the air and say, you know, I expected you to wave your hand and do something and make it all better. God's going, I did, but in my way and in my time. Today is actually from 2 Kings. We're going to look at chapter 5. It's a story that most people probably don't know. If I was to ask, who here even knew that there was a 2 Kings? Who even knew there was a 1 Kings? It's not one we really read from very much, but there's some really hidden nuggets of treasure within these books. And this is kind of what we're going to look at today, which is how God answers prayers. So, hear this story. So just kind of kick back and it'll be story time. Now, Naaman was commander of the army in the king of Aram. And he was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Now, bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel. And she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, if only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. By all means, go, the king of Aram replied. I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So Naaman left, and taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. The letter he took to the king of Israel read, with this letter I am sending my servant Naaman to you, so that you may cure him of his leprosy. As soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and said, am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of leprosy? See how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me? Then Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes. He sent him this message, why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Now Elisha sent a messenger to say to him, go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed. Naaman went away angry, and he said, I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave over his hand over the spot and cure me of my leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Couldn't I have washed in them and been cleansed? So he turned, and he went off in a rage. Naaman's servants went to him and said, my father, if the prophet had told you to do something great, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, wash and be cleansed? So he went down and he dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him. And his flesh was totally restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, now I know that there is no God in all the world except Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant. Elisha answered, as surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept these things. And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. If you will not, said Naaman, please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry. For your servant will never again make a burnt offerings or sacrifices to any other god but the Lord. forgive your servant for the one thing. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow down, and he is leaning on my arm, and I have to bow there also. When I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this." "Go in peace," Elisha said. Now after Naaman had traveled some distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said to himself, "My master is too easy on Naaman, this Aramean, by not accepting from him what he brought. As surely as the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him." So Gehazi hurried after Naaman, and when Naaman saw him running toward him, he got down from the chariot to meet him. "Is everything all right?" he asked. "Everything is all right," Gehazi answered. "My master sent me to say 2 young men from the company of the prophets have just come to me from the hill country of Ephraim. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 sets of clothing." "Well, by all means, take 2 talents," said Naaman. He urged Gehazi to accept them, and then tied up the 2 talents of silver and the 2 bags with 2 sets of clothing. He gave them to 2 of his servants, and they carried them ahead of Gehazi. When Gehazi came to the hill, he took the things from the servants and put them away in the house. He sent the men away, and they left. When he went in and stood before his master Elisha, he asked him, "Where have you been, Gehazi?" "Well, your servant didn't go anywhere," Gehazi answered. But Elisha said to him, "Was not my spirit with you when the man got down from his chariot to meet you? Is this the time to take money or to accept clothes or olive groves or vineyards or flocks or herds or male or female slaves? Naaman's leprosy will cling to you and to your descendants forever." Then Gehazi went from Elisha's presence, and his skin was leprous. It had become as white as snow. Lessons the reading. Thanks be to God. When you pray, do you really want the answer? Or in the case of the story that we read from today, what if the answer looks a lot different than what you think it should be? Now, to give you a little background with this story that we read, why it's even more phenomenal. So the Arameans and the Israelites were at war with each other this whole time. It had been just war after war after war. So they were mortal enemies, these 2 kings. And don't you just love how God works? Last week we looked at the chosen. And we looked at the 9 chosen Gen Zers that were picked to watch the series for the first time, and the reactions and all that. Those men and women were not happenstance. I would say that each and every one were chosen by God to be a part of that little documentary that they did. Well, it's the same way here. So the Aramean king had gone in and they had defeated the Israelites again, or at least a village, and they plundered everything, and along with it they took servants, men and women. And it just so happened that they picked this one gal who was a servant who not only feared God but knew Elisha. And it just so happened the Aramean king, his right-hand man, literally, this general who was very high up, came down with leprosy. Now, I don't know if you know that much about leprosy. It would probably be the same as, let's say, monkeypox today. I mean, it was like, yeah, they got cast out of the village. They couldn't even be around anyone else. So this was basically a death sentence if you got leprosy. But it's this one young servant who says to his wife, "I know a guy. And he, through our God, can heal Naaman." Actually, his name in Hebrew is probably Naham, but we'll say Naaman to make it easy. And so the interesting thing here is, now again, this is a foreign country. This is a gal who's technically one of her enemies. But he must be that desperate that he is willing to seek help from the enemy. So he goes to the king and he says to the king, "Hey, I found out that there's a guy who can heal me over in Israel's camp. Can you make it possible? Can I go?" And the king says, "I'll do one better than that." All right, so this shows you how much he loves this guy. He doesn't just allow him to go. He writes a letter and he sends all this silver and this gold and clothing, 10 sets of clothing, to give to the king as a goodwill gesture. But did you notice how he wrote the letter? Have you ever had that where you friends to try to help, and they only make it worse. So Naaman goes to the king, and he gives him the letter, and the letter basically says, here's all this stuff, heal my servant, heal my general. And what does the king do? He panics. He rips his clothes, and he goes, who am I? I'm not God, I can't heal you. Now, since they had been warring, he thinks it's a setup. He thinks it's an excuse now for the Arameans to come in and attack again because the Israelite king could not heal his general. When Elisha hears this, now Elisha is the gentleman who took the mantle from Elijah. So he is now the next one to carry on the legacy. And he is the prophet of Israel at the time. When he hears that the king has run his clothes, and you don't just do that any day, you know something up. And he hears what's going on, and he says, no, I will heal the young man, bring him to me. Now this is where the story gets interesting. Because Naaman goes with his entourage and all of his stuff, and he goes to Elisha's door. But what does Elisha not do? He doesn't come out. He stays inside, and he tells his servants, go tell him to go dip in the Jordan 7 times. Now the Jordan was dirty. It was nasty. Okay? Now what happens to Naaman? He gets so mad. He's like, does he know who I am? You know, I expected him to come out and wave his hand over and you know, call upon his God and heal me right in front of him. And then he gets even madder. He goes, Icky Jordan, we've got 2 rivers in Syria that are way cleaner than that. If I wanted to go dunk in a river, I could have done that. And it says he goes off in rage. Then his servants come up to him. They talk a little sense into him. They said, so let me get this straight. If Elisha had told you to go and do some big grandiose thing, you would have done it, right? But because he told you something simple, just go down to the river and dunk 7 times, you won't do it? Now this is the interesting part. Because we come to this point in the story where you see these stories all the time in the Bible. There's a fork in the road. They can make 2 decisions. They can either be mad and stomp off and never know what would happen, or he can obey. Interesting thing here is this man obeys. I guess he figures it must be that desperate, what have I got to lose? So he goes down into the Jordan and he dunks himself 7 times. And what happens on the 7th time? He comes up fully restored. It says his skin is better than it ever was when he was just a young boy. Just picture that for a minute. This man's life had been totally destroyed because of leprosy. He was going to be ostracized. He was going to be an outcast. He couldn't have anything to do with anybody. It was a complete death sentence. And now he's been given his life back. So he goes back to Elisha, and he tries to give him all the gifts, and Elisha says, nope, not having any of it, that's fine. What does this man do that makes the other part of this story so miraculous? It wasn't that God just healed a Gentile that was an enemy of Israel. This man requests, he said, can I have, not a little bit, but he wanted enough dirt, 2 mules worth that they could carry of dirt. And why? He knew, being the right-hand man to the king, they worshipped the god Remi. And he knew that he was going to have to continue to go in with the king as he gave his sacrifices and worship. He said, I want the ground from Israel. I want God's ground to take with me, and I am going to put it right there in the place. So that way when I kneel, I'm kneeling on the ground of Yahweh. And please forgive me for having to go into that temple with my king. Oh, gives you goosebumps, doesn't it? This man who was a Gentile, who would worship, and I don't know Remi and that god particularly. I know a lot of the foreign gods who would worship, but I don't know him. But that was what he was entrenched in. And he changed in a moment, as Paul says, in the twinkling of an eye. And he is now convert. God, Yahweh. How powerful. And it all came down to what? One decision. To do what he was told. Now, I carried on the rest of that scripture because I like how that story ends. It could have ended right there. A lot of pastors will end it right there. But there's so much more valuable to that story. Because Elisha has a couple servants, and he's looking at that going, that's a lot of money. That's clothes. And you just let it go? You're nuts. So he takes a couple servants with him, and they take off, and they chase him down. And so when Naaman sees him, he goes, you know, is everything okay? He goes, oh, yeah. We just had a couple people come over from Ephraim. And we want to know, can we have some supper? And just 2 things of clothes? Sure, take it, you know. So he goes off. He makes the servants do his dirty work. They have to actually carry the loot back to the place. But as he gets close, he takes it from him and he goes and squirrels it away in his house. And then he makes his way over to Elisha. Now this is the part that a lot of people do not catch. What is Elisha saying to the servant? Where have you been? I see the parallel here with when God asked Adam, where were you? So he got apple juice running in front of his Where were you? Oh, no, I was here all along, went nowhere. And then Elisha says, I saw you. My 2 cents this month in the newsletter went in a totally different direction than I was originally thinking. But it was talking about time. Interesting how this connects with the sermon. Because we're based here on earth on time, right? Everything works on a 24-hour day, 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. Everything is based on time. Past, present, future. But in the heavenly realm, there is no time. There is no space. That's how God can see past, he can see present, he can see future. There's no beginning, there's no end, because it's in a different realm. Well, the prophets were able to move into that heavenly realm, and in that heavenly realm, he could see exactly what his servant was doing. And he calls him on it. He says, I saw you as you stopped him, and he got out of his chariot. And then he doesn't leave it there. This doesn't say that the servant fell down and asked for forgiveness and mercy. He says the very leprosy that left Naaman is going to come on you, but not just you, you and all your generations to follow. How huge is that? Especially if you're a generation down the road. We don't think about that sometimes, do we? How our actions, what we do, what we say, what we think, not only impact us, but how it could impact the generations to follow. So how does all this come back to the title? When you pray, do you really want the answer? Well, my question to you is, I want you to think back to maybe, it wasn't that long ago, where you prayed for something, but you had in your head how you wanted the answer to come. I want you to fix this, God, but I want it to be in this way. Or I want you to solve this problem, but it has to fit the way I think it should. So what happens if God does, but it looks differently? Do you want it? Do you acknowledge it? Or do you get mad, like Naaman? Throw his hand up in the air and say, you know, I expected you to wave your hand and do something and make it all better. God's going, I did, but in my way and in my time. You know, we all know the joke probably. I don't think there's anybody since Facebook that probably doesn't know this one. But that's exactly what the sermon is about. There was a man who, there was this big flood that came through. He's by the river and he needed to get out and he couldn't get out anymore. And along came the neighbors with a boat. He'd been praying to God to save me, save me. And the neighbors came by with the boat. And they said, come on, get on. He goes, no, you go on. I've been praying. God's going to save me. So they go on. The waters keep rising. Pretty soon he's hanging from the gutters. And God sends the EMTs and they've been out cruising the place looking for people. And they said, come on, get in the boat. He goes, no. I've been praying. God is going to save me. Go on. And the next picture, he's up on top of the roof, praying desperately that God will save him. Along comes the helicopter. Says, come on. No. I've got this. God's got this. He's going to save me. And then the man dies. He stands up in heaven before God and he says, I don't understand. I desperately pray that you would save me. And it says, ask and you shall receive. And God goes, I sent you 2 boats and a helicopter. What more do you want? Kind of a duh, right? But this man had a different idea of how he thought God was going to miraculously wave his hand, I guess, and swoop him up on eagles or something. I don't know. Instead of 2 boats, not one, but 2 boats and a helicopter. So, my question to you, when you go back this week, if maybe there's something right now that you're praying for, or maybe it was something that you did pray for, and God didn't do it in the way you were wanting. Did you say no? Are you going to say no? Are you going to have the faith finally of Nahum when he got some sense knocked into him and say, okay, I'm going to put my trust in you and I'm going to allow you to answer this prayer however you see choose. It's kind of a tough one, especially when we have our mind set on one thing, and that may not be God's thing. So as you leave today, go home and ponder that, and it's always nice to spend a little extra time in prayer, asking that God will show you the answer that